All right, so we're here to talk about how activism can take root across collaborative networks. We're actually here to really learn about how these people became so fabulous in their practice, right? So let's just jump right on in there and find out more. Can you guys tell us who you are and more about something about your business and what you do?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecilia Cuff. I am the CEO of the Nascent Group. We are a business strategy and hospitality design firm, and we've done hotels and restaurants and golf resorts, ski resorts all over the country. Most recently, I moved back to Chicago, my hometown. Thank you. Glad to be home, except during wintertime. But recently moved back to open up Brownsville Winery with my business partner, Eric Williams. So we designed and worked on that project for a little over 3 years. It was really distracting during COVID, so it was great. And then recently opened up Southside Sanctuary, located on 47th and King Drive, which is an outdoor green third space, very, very needed for our community. And then we've got a few more projects up our sleeves for the next couple months. So we've got a restaurant that just opened in the South Shore Cultural Center called Nafsi South Shore, which is a Black-owned restaurant in a space that historically we weren't allowed in. So we're really excited about that. But yeah, lots of things. There's lots of empty space in Chicago, and so I definitely jump at the opportunity to make those spaces beautiful and make people smile.
Awesome. All right, next we have Dave.
Dave Pabellon, Associate Professor of Graphic Design at Columbia College Chicago. I also have a personal practice called It Is Just Dave. Website is itisjustdave.com. Instagram handle it_is_Dave. Not joking.
He's not joking.
I got recently tenured a spring ago, which has felt like extremely satisfying and terrifying at the same time. My work also includes working with cultural institutions, nonprofits, and activist circles. In the spring of 2022, with the work in collaboration with Design as Protest, we put together the exhibition You Are Anti-Racist, where NTI is in brackets, so it looks like you are racist from like the signage outside the gallery. We thought that was kind of interesting. And then a project that I'm working on right now, a couple ones through the Center for Urban Economic Development through UIC, and we just released a report on warehouse workers at Walmart, and then we had 2 other reports that were designed for Amazon warehouse workers. So that's been really interesting to work with researchers and then giving their data like visualization. Yeah, that's about it.
That's awesome. And last but not least, or right before me, Nick.
Hey there, pals. My name is Nick Adam. I'm a design director at a studio in Chicago called Span. We're a graphic design, brand identity type of space. A couple projects that we have going on right now. So we're a very small studio. We're about 9 people, but we actually kind of function as 3 different studios. And so within my studio, the work that we have going on right now, a project called Safe Travel for All. It's a regional equity engagement campaign for CMAP. It's with CMAP and led by a team called Daylight. And it's for, as CMAP looks at planning transportation safety for the 7 counties, including Cook County, they're looking at doing 2 years of engagement by people most affected by safety. This is the first effort that they've ever done to do outside engagement prior to the act of like large-scale planning. Another effort is with the Illinois Department of Human Rights, and we're helping them create like Illinois' first ever hate act non-law enforcement response team. So there's, we're working with a group called IHDD to do the service design around this work, and we're kind of giving language and creating how to speak about it and what it looks like. But it's a statewide support service for folks that have either experienced hate, witnessed hate, or encountered it. And it's a non-law enforcement based service.
Awesome. Fabulous people. And I'm Summer Coleman, Summer Coleman Design, also Severe Side Productions. I work with underserved communities that don't have access to design firms like SPAN. I meet them where they are, and I get them ready to be invested in and be trusted enough to have a brand, colors, things like that. So I inform them more about where to get their brand so they can, get more money and have people trust them more. So let's get into it. Find out more about how networks, how we can be more collaborative, how these things work. But first we have to find out, maybe get into what are some of the key experiences that have happened, I guess, along your design journey that have gotten you here today. What made you choose SPAN? What made you choose Just Dave? You know what I mean? Tell me more about how you got to this point in your design journey. Anyone?
I'll start. So through my design journey, I worked for Hyatt Hotels for a little over a decade. So almost many of the hotels that you'll see, North America, South America, and all the islands during the year of the 2000s. I helped design both the hotel, the hospitality operation, as well as the restaurant operations. And I loved it. I loved the way that when you think about design, you think about wayfinding. I love the way that, when you think about design, how do you incorporate the local flavor and how do you storytell with every single experience of a space. I love the action of designing, how people felt at every single motion and really doing multi-sensory experiences. And I love to see something go from nothing to a space. Hotels very much, and many of our lived environments, our built environments are little cities that nobody really thinks about. And so what became more, I think, challenging to me within working in a corporate realm was that there was only so much I could do to use that little city to create socioeconomic activity for the community that we're in. I felt like we were building models that were a little bit extractive from the communities by not trying to figure out a way to more effectively locally source, or by not figuring out ways to hire the underserved or the ignored populations that don't have access to computers, or figuring out how to work outside of that segment that are easily touchable through Indeed or the other traditional ways. So how to reach out to seniors, how to reach out to those with challenges or disabilities. And so from there, I really was focused on building a company that would build the communities we were in, because I knew that there had to be a better way to design, to speak to communities, and to design businesses that would build the communities we were in. So that kind of became a driver of my community, or a driver of my career path. And so I think now it's been about 20 years working on my own, and we've been able to incorporate that into all of our designs. And so every single project we do is a learning experience, which is great because every community we build or grow in has a different challenge. It has a different set of needs. And I think part of that is, just listening to the communities where we're in.
That's dope. It sounds as though that you have created a network of things that you've put together, so you don't really have to go out too much outside to find the things that you've come to bring in. So you said that you love the way things get built like a little city, so you try to figure out the ways in which that you can bring your network in. I really appreciate that. Dave, can you tell us a little bit more about how you've gotten through your design journey and made it to Just Dave and to the other places in which you work with?
It's not formulaic. I would actually say it's really accidental. I didn't share this whenever I've kind of applied for academic roles, but I've gone, for my undergraduate, I went to 5 different schools in 5 years. Yeah, and so I didn't really put that, I don't put that in my CV. I don't promote that. But I think it has a lot to do with, my dad would have this saying, he was an immigrant from the Philippines, he had this saying, be good, not very good, which was like really weird to hear because, you know, like Asian parents are like, why aren't you scoring 100%? He's like, no, just be good, but not very good, meaning like don't draw too much attention to yourself, but also don't waver too much. And I think like acclimating to the design field, you kind of had to have this like big personality and like show off your work, and I was never really good at that. Instead, I was very lucky to have great mentors along the way that just like believed in like this really kind of weird designer that had all these different kind of interests and backgrounds. And so I think it's the kind of entirety of like making mistakes along like the learning journey that has been really helpful, because I could point to all the failures and be like, okay, I learned this from that. So I really appreciate what Cece said about the idea of like everything's a learning moment. And so a lot of failure has kind of shaped the way that I've become, I don't know, I say lucky, but the way that I've kind of gotten here. So, yeah.
I like that. Be a jack of all trades, but a master of none. That's what we're doing. All right. Get it. Being good, right? Exactly. Tell us more, Nick, about how you got on your design journey.
Sure. I never really knew what design was growing up. As a younger person, I was involved in a lot of, I got brought into like kind of graffiti writing culture that then brought me into like the punk scene and the rave scene of the early 90s. And those three kind of communities, they're kind of self-creating, they create their own ecosystem, they create their own existence. And for the ones that I was a part of, we also like experienced a lot of death as a younger person. And I started to choose some paths that allowed me to move further away from that, because I lost some friends that I was very close to. My journey was extremely slow. I went to a terrible undergraduate school. They're defunct now, so in case they're watching, it's okay for me to say that. The government closed them down because they weren't exactly real. And so then I had like 7 years of kind of having jobs where I really was just learning the like world of like, what's it like to work on a team? What's it like to have a budget? What's it like to have timelines? And eventually doing some kind of jobs that were very much like designing, let's say, end caps at Walmart, if that makes sense. I started to find some additional free time to do kind of more artistic-based things that got me into design crowds that actually were ones I looked up to. By taking the free time and doing these artistic things, I got to start to interact with all these people that I never thought I would ever meet, and then I started working with them. And I think why I brought up that stuff about the subcultures early on, or like friends passing, death is kind of on my mind constantly, and I'm always trying to think of like, what do I want to be doing while I'm living? And so I try to structure a practice that allows me to work with clients where I'm finding infinite joy making work for them. I think I'm constantly thinking about, golly, like, what if I pass and it was a bunch of end caps, you know? Maybe that's fine for some folks, totally. I think yeah.
No, you're good. Thank you. Those were all good. I can tell you a little bit about my design journey too. Having a child at 21, leaving the corporate scene and just becoming a designer. Did not know. I was in the art school, but I just was like, this would be the least expensive art, right, path would be graphic design, because it's a computer, and that's all you really need. I was talented in other skilled forms of design or, art, but that would be the reason, pretty much the only reason why I became a graphic designer, because it was the cheapest form. Fast forwarding to now, I'm learning that I did not want to be in a firm, right? Working with firms, I've been down many different avenues. I have chosen to be alone in this journey, only because it seems to be easier to meet my community where they are by myself, it seems. So that's how I kind of got here. Just, it was an economic move associated with me having a daughter at 21. And that's how I kind of got here. We all have, but it seems as though we all have way different practices. Like, I'm independent, you work with restaurant design, hospitality design. Dave, I'm thinking you have a client base, correct?
I'm more academic.
Yeah, economic, and you work in a firm. So with all of that said, how do you feel, or how do you think our diversity in our design practices gets us closer to working with our communities? Like, how do you get to touch, how does SPAN touch the community that you're trying to touch, or even engage in a different way? Because, a lot of communities can't come to, a firm. So tell us more about how you engage your communities.
Totally. Thanks for that. Is it okay if I jump right in? So Summer, you brought up the idea of kind of creating this structure to ensure that you make yourself accessible to your communities. So something kind of interesting about SPAN is that there's kind of 3 partners, and we operate kind of separate from each other. So each one of us has our own kind of clients, our own team and everything. I'm a team of 1 person and 1 other person. And what that does is it helps with that ability to go, okay, can we make a process, a budget that's a little bit more accessible, that doesn't allow things to, so that it's not always like, okay, well, we have to have a budget that's just for a larger entity. So I kind of like having smaller teams where I guess what's kind of interesting also about SPAN is for moments in which there's like a larger engagement, other members of the studio can kind of come together and work on those things. But for the most part, a lot of my projects are kind of smaller, so it ends up being 1 person and myself.
I like that. So it's kind of a segmented type of thing, but then the group can come back together. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen a lot of practices like it ever.
Yeah.
And so what's kind of nice is, let's say I somehow I won this big proposal. I can bring someone in the studio that's let's say a 3D renderer that always works over there. They can kind of join on this team. So it's always kind of morphing based upon budget size, time, and everything.
Seems like it would be a positive aspect to have different parts of talent you can pull from in the office. So that person knows fabrication, you don't, right? You get to pull that person into your team even though they might be a part of a different team. So that's a really interesting way that SPAN works. Nick, or Dave, can you get into some of the ways in which, or Cece, if you'd like to get into some of the ways in which the practice is different? I know you don't. Do you have a client base, or is this just it seems like your practice is based on your specific business needs. Tell us more about how that works.
We have a client base. So right now we have clients. We have a cannabis client. We're designing a cannabis company in New York. We have a property management client we have in northern New Mexico that's got like 300 properties, and we just acquired our new hotel. And then in Chicago, we have about 6 clients that we work with who are either emerging entrepreneurs who have a concept and that they want to get their idea from concept stage into actualization. So finding their first brick and mortar or launching their business, or people who have bought, like emerging developers who have bought a full city block and want to make it go. I make things go, yeah. Right. So we have a client base. All of our clients have been through word of mouth, which I think in the design industry tends to be something that's the same, is that you have somebody that's incredible. Like I recently worked on a project with Nick, and now won't stop talking about it because of the level of the level of output that I received. And same with Summer. I've worked with Summer, and somebody reached out to me in our community and said, hey, I need somebody to design a logo for me for this new nonprofit that I'm making. It's incredible. And so I immediately thought of Summer. And so, I think As I agree with what Nick said. My team is a fully female, queer-fueled team. I love all of my team. They're great, but we do have the ability to ebb and flow and expand. So we have a core team of 5 that works within the business strategy service sort of field, and then outside of that, we have somebody who helps when we need to pull in construction, or somebody for research and development, or somebody specific to 3D renderings and architectural drawings. And so we kind of ebb and flow based on the client needs, and so that allows us the flexibility from the Nascent Group firm to be able to kind of hunker down, because there is a vast difference between a nonprofit, to be honest, that can't pay their bills on a month-to-month basis, and a client who's launching a hotel in an island. So we have to be able, if you want to be able to work with communities, you have to be able to be flexible with that. But I do think there's a model of subsidy that comes into that, and I always felt like I was Robin Hood when I was little, because I was like, I'm gonna take all the ideas from the corporations and I'm gonna bring it to my community. But I think that same idea of that Robin Hood mentality is, I'm going to use what, those who have funding and those who have money to kind of subsidize the cost for what I know in my community I need to be a part of building.
I agree. I also see the subsidization of us working with each other, right? So like, I don't have to go and find a new designer. I know exactly how fabulous this person is to work with. Let us collaborate the network and see who's in your network, You might have a concrete pourer that I might need, right? So we can bring our networks together to collaborate better and to get better results. So I find also that in my practice, word of mouth is a big thing. Once you get out there and you start doing better work and more work, a lot of people just kind of contact you and need you for different projects. Once you start, once again, collaborating within your networks, you kind of don't really have to find it. It's not really hard to find what you really need once you have a good network. So, yeah.
There's just oh shoot, I don't know if it's working. Oh, there it is. As you're saying that, I'm just kind of thinking about, do you ever hear like on the radio these advertisements for like
Top Dog Law?
Or no, for what is it? There's like these entities that are like, we're brand designers, we're website designers, and I'm like, what type of model do they have to buy this advertising? And then you look at their portfolio and you're like, what is going on here? And so yeah, I think a big thing with us is like the marketing effort is only the work that's being done. There is no like outside, time to promote the studio. It's like, no, it's just like doing great work and being likable.
Yeah, I would agree. Design dope shit. Design.
Well, that was good. I loved hearing how networks can be plugged into each other and how we work very well together as teams when we do need that. Getting into the more thoughtfulness of the thing, coming into the challenges of working with communities, right? Have you thought of some of the ways in which, well, I guess we have to identify the challenges. So if you can tell us some challenges that you might come up against when trying to collaborate, right, with networks, or trying to bring people together, or trying to convey ideas across different platforms that might not, or might work or might not work. Tell us more about that. Anybody? I can go first. Yeah. Love you guys. So some challenges. Let's talk about some challenges. I find sometimes that when people don't have access to designers, they don't know what they need. So it takes a little bit longer. I know time is a thing. We were talking about ROI in the last discussion, right? Our rate of return or an investment or a return on investment. I find that the return on investment in my practice more so comes from helping and giving the information, right? So we were talking about power sharing. I learned a lot when I worked at Thirst before it was Span, and I bring that back to my community. So when I learn, whatever I learned, I'm bringing back to you and I'm giving that back to you. Now that might not You might not be paying for that extra information that I'm giving you, but that is my value add that I'm giving to you. You might not paid for it, but you need it. So I'm going to add that into my thing. So I find that some of the challenges might be me giving a lot and there is no money ROI, right, return of investment, but there is a return of investment when I see that brand looking fabulous and they know exactly what they need to do with that. So yeah, the challenge usually is they just don't know what to do with me. And then I make it so, I make them know. So do you guys have the similar challenges in this regard, or can you tell me some things that might come up that might be challenging?
Yeah, I think in the same respect, as most people in the audience design something for other people or for a client, it is, like you said, applying a value for it. So people have an idea of where they're going from A to Z, and a lot of times I don't think that design is always a step in that map, and that comes from architectural design. Like they're like, I just want this store. You're like, yes, but if you want a retail operation, you have to think about what is the experience, what is the floor plan, what does the brand look like, what is the design of the narrative that shapes, what the product is that you're putting out there. So I think being able to articulate the importance of design to clients it's not a challenge, but it's something, it is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that you have to be ahead of to be able to explain to clients. I think something that I've seen what I've seen work in that challenge, in that sense, is that understanding how to use pre-development and budget for pre-development dollars in a project. So if you're opening a hotel, I would weight the branding and design of your actual brand alongside the design of the architectural drawings. And so being able to allocate pre-development dollars to any project that you're going to design, whether if it's a physical project, I think is an important part of that journey. But again, I think it's something that most business owners skip over because they just think of what the end result is going to be.
My answer is going to be a little bit different, just because I'm going to just preface this with, I'm coming from a place of absolute kind of like entitlement, or like I have the ability to take on projects that don't necessarily have budgetary restrictions. Like I don't have to worry about it because I've really kind of used my creative scholarly research time to take on projects that kind of align with my politics and ethics and morals. And so that's kind of different. Like back when I was in undergraduate, all my design professors had their freelance work, which would then invest in their creative scholarly. So they're kind of getting double dipping in funds. And I'm kind of going the opposite route where I'm like, how could I use creative scholarly to work with people that I really care about and projects that I really align with to kind of promote their work, and using design practice as more or less a full service where it's not so much capital based. It's much more about effort and amplification.
It's funny, I feel like there's different notes on each one of these that I'm like, oh, I've had an experience like this. There was a studio that I worked at for about 7 years, and we did a lot of work that was extremely community-based, and there wasn't maybe a lot of, in the beginning, a lot of mindfulness towards what happens if the hours aren't respected. In that space, we each had winter jackets on during winter in the office. We had a space that was very cold, and we didn't necessarily have heat. It wasn't that great. And that's because we didn't really respect the business engine or the model. We just kind of were like, oh, okay, well, this one's over budget and that one's over budget and this one has no budget, but we really want to do it. And so to your point of when you're starting a project with a client, oftentimes there's the getting to know you and getting to understand the service and the exchange. There's a massive amount of hours that go into just writing the proposal and getting to know each other prior to any act of design, prior to anything being signed. And so there's, let's say 50 hours that go into just conversation with this person to make sure you two are aligned and understanding what can come from this. and oftentimes you're also kind of reframing the brief, which is cool. Something that just like, as this is about kind of like activism and like how is design activism, I often think that in that early stage, prior to work ever beginning, or prior to like there being an official contractual relationship between the two of you, oftentimes the person on the client end has a bunch of ideas, and some of those ideas could use some like, golly, what if we did this? Or like, what if we also address this type of thing? So not only are you kind of spending time to get to know each other, to write up the services, to define what would happen, but you're also kind of going, oh, you want to do this, but it's actually going to poorly affect these other things. And so there's a greater opportunity to bring that in. So sometimes it's this reframing the brief, recreating a proposal, and all of that's 100% unpaid, right?
Right, that part, always. I love the way that you tied in the activism part. Being an activist, a design activist, right? This is what we're doing, though. We are activating, we are giving spaces things that they didn't have before or access to, right? And that's being an activist. Like, you are opening the mind or opening the space up, right? So what I would ask is, do you see your design journey including more social impact as it pertains to design activism? Do you see yourself going further into the social space of, like we were talking about this, Dave, right? You could either be rich or you could help the people. Like, how do you move your practice more into the activism, social space, right? But still make some money, right? That's what we were really there. Is there a really great answer for this? We're gonna see if we can find one. I would say, and this is my answer to that question. Like I said before, you got to do the work, and you're gonna have some sacrifices. You're gonna have to sacrifice sometimes a piece of the check, but I think the positive note that comes out of that is you are helping the people gain something that they didn't have before, and give them access to information that they didn't have before. So that is the payoff for me, and I just made that the payoff. I know a lot of people like to be rich, but on to you. Let's hear what you guys have to say. Do you think that moving towards activism, your design journey towards that space leads to setbacks, or can we make this not a setback discussion? Can this be, right?
I think the word activism is kind of loaded in a lot of ways, and so sometimes it sounds militant, and I think I'm just going to take a step back and give a quick anecdote. I was born on October 4th, and so that's also the day of St. Francis of Assisi. So my parents were like, we're going to name you Francis, and my dad's like, no way. Like, he's going to get beat up. Francis of Assisi? Like, come on, just say that out loud. And so they changed it quickly, and this is like why my website's It Is Just Dave, because he just quickly changed on the birth certificate. It's just Dave. And they're like, David? They're like, no, Dave Pabellon, that's it. And Dave translates to beloved. And I think about this in a lot of different ways. And we talk about activism, we talk about connectivity, we talk about community. And I think when we're talking about challenges with clients, and again, this is coming from a place of privilege that has a supplemental income as an academic, is that I get to pick my clients. And in a lot of ways, I'm living this utopian life where I could pick my clients, and like picking family, my clients, my design peers are family. Like, this panel is like, we had this long conversation about before, was not accidental. Like, I won't tell the story now, but no, it's fine. But the idea is, like, I've known Nick since I moved back to Chicago. I've spent many a late nights with Cece on our rooftops illegally, kind of throwing things off roofs. And all these things, all these people, if I see the Stevenson brothers in the crowd, I have a history, and I have trust in who they are as people, and I have trust in the way they carry themselves as creatives. and community builders. And so that is like the thing that kind of creates the thread for me, is like creating a network or a kind of stratosphere where every person that I work with is somebody I love in some way. And I think building those relationships is how you kind of figure out pain points of like finances and resources.
Sorry there, I keep not knowing when to talk when it turns on. So there's like a lot of terms and ideas in here that we could like really, make a lot of assumptions around, like what is an activist, what is wealth, what is rich, what is sacrifice. I do kind of struggle with the word activist, and I actually think that in some ways, like every single person is an activist, but it's like, what are you kind of activating? What are you working towards? So again, just kind of going back to what I said in the beginning, I'm often thinking about how I'm spending life, and let's say as I sit down with my mom or with these peers here, right? I've known Cecilia and Dave for 20 years, way before we ever knew what our careers were. And if I sat down next to you and go, let's say we catch up and we're talking about like all the fabulous things I'm doing for, let's say, like grape soda, right? And like I pull up in like a really fantastic car, I don't think I could really live well with myself. The question's kind of like, do you see yourself going deeper into work that's activism? And so I think all of us in the paths that we choose, we are like standing up and activating based upon the subject matter that we've chose to work for. And that's not to shame anyone that like gets the big house and the great car. They have different motives. I have a Prius C, a 2014 that I split with my wife, and I feel infinite wealth with that. And so how do we define these things is something there. Something that I do a lot of throughout a year, I maybe mentor about, let's say, 10 to 15 young designers, and the things that happen from that, after doing that for about a couple decades now, all sorts of new opportunities happen. You have kind of no idea what a next project's going to be or what a next collaboration's going to be. And so I see myself going further down this path. I have no idea what that next thing is, because it is a state of constant investment that ends up kind of showering back on you.
I think when I define activism, if in my eyes, there are so many different types of activists. I have friends who are marching every day, I have friends who are, lobbyists who are, lobbying for certain causes. And I think in my role in design, the idea of activism is doing something to influence a group of people or others to have a different viewpoint or influence them in general. And so I often get frustrated with my friends who are like, not necessarily the trolls, but they'll see something where we've done a ribbon cutting with the mayor's office and they're like, we can tell that you are far right, far left. But when I'm like, you guys, but you're on Instagram right now? And I've worked on something for the past 3 years, and because there are governmental bodies but what are you doing? Like, and we probably, again, same graffiti artist friends, where you're like, dude, come, what are you doing? And so I guess I look at activism in a different way now than I did when I was younger. In my understanding, I do in my field of work, I do a lot of code switching. So I believe that I am the voice of my community because I do listen. When we designed Southside Sanctuary, we had monthly meetings with every sector of the Bronzeville community for a year. So we went to the senior homes, we went to the public meetings, we sat in the park, we went to the skate parks over there, and so we tried to figure out ways to take what the community was telling us that they needed and then work with the government to know the government has systems, and there are people taking advantage of those systems who are affluent, who are not advocates for our community. And so I think that part of activism in my role in design is understanding what those systems are that other people are either taking advantage of, and not in a bad way. They're taking time to look to see what resources are available, and they're activating those resources, whether it's a TIF that they use to build something that is extracted from the community, or that puts in another currency exchange and a fried chicken shop and a KFC or something like that. And so I want to look at, in my understanding of design and my design work and designing space, I want to take those same things and those same resources that other companies that don't have the best interest of our community in mind, I want to take advantage of those same resources and bring those resources back to a community, back to something that's more grassroots. And so when I think about activism and my role in activism and in the design that I do, again, code switching is a big part of it, because I have to tell, I'm not going to go to, even Southside Sanctuary, when Pat Dow at the ribbon cutting, she still can't explain what it is. And Pat Dow loves Brownsville. She's our alderman. But I think at this point, I couldn't explain to her, I want to make a green space where kids can skateboard. Like, not going to fly. Same with the mayor's office and Department of Planning. But I knew that we needed an outdoor space where our community could have seniors walk through the space and sit down and talk to each other without feel safe. I knew that for kids who are walking, and anybody who's walking to the Green Line, there needed to be a space that was well lit so that they can walk from the train station to the residential part of King Drive. I knew that we need to get kids off of just their computers, and having green space in our communities is something that's really important. And I know that skateboarding is probably one of those, skateboarding is one of those activities where you can't be on your phone and do it at the same time. Where you learn to pick somebody else up and brush them off, where you learn to fail and you learn lessons. And so, and also a place where the farmer's market, can exist, where you can meet your neighbors. So when I think about design, I'm not good at this. I couldn't articulate, this is what I want to design and build. But I knew there were funding dollars available. I knew that if I didn't go after it, somebody else would, who would build something that maybe wasn't as beneficial. And I also know that, and I think part of the challenge is we have to know that what we're convincing people of, actually we can do, and to figure out a way to articulate that, because I think we are the best advocates for our community, and I think that's a big part of activism.
Agreed, totally agree. Go ahead.
There's something kind of cool about what's being said across each one of the stories that I'm just starting to notice. Is we're talking a lot about like conversation and listening. Like when we think about design, a lot of people think about like what is made or the act of making. And I think the act of making and what is made is maybe 5% of like the act of design. And it's much more the conversations and actions around that inform what is made. I think the ability to have small practices is a highly revolutionary act that used to be commonplace. In the history of Chicago, there used to be many small design practices. There's hardly any right now. The majority of designers go off to, and good for them, receive crazy pay at an advertising agency, work for Meta, work for things like this, right? And like they're advocates for, Facebook and Instagram, right? But by way of their actions. So it's a very kind of revolutionary act to have a small studio existing in like the contemporary space of technology and design today. And what the trade-off is, what you end up getting is you actually end up getting people that listen and speak and hear and translate and then make the design way more than the other spaces. Because as we've kind of talked about like the infrastructure, the human infrastructure of our studios, they're smaller, they require less funds, they require less everything. And so that makes it accessible for more things versus when you're kind of talking about a different type of developer that takes the same TIF money and kind of comes in, do you think they have the same exact conversations you're having? They don't even have the ability because of how large their human infrastructure is, right? How much money they would necessitate to do one community engagement versus 3 years of community engagement.
No, I totally agree. I am interested in the way in which we do collaborate, right? But how do you integrate new networks into your systems, right? How do we find new people to collaborate with? Are we interested in that, right? Like, we know each other, right? So I can always like be like, hey. But sometimes you might need to incorporate some new faces and some new blood. So how do we go about doing that? And I can tell you how I go about doing it. I just go outside and start asking people questions. Like, I just met a fabulous person from the Greater Good today. Like, just going around and asking people questions. What do you do? How can we work together? So those are the easier ways of how to do that. But I'm sure there's some other ways in which we get this done. How do you find your new networks, your new contractors, your new concrete layers? Like, do you just run into these people? Like, you're like, hey, you build hotels? Would you like to build one with me? How do we find these people, right?
I want to circle back to this this anecdotal story because I referenced it earlier. You bring people in, you just welcome them in. I don't know. I think that's like pretty much it. For me, it's I was asked when I moved back to Chicago, how did I get politicized? Yeah. And I think about it, and my kind of frank question in this written interview was, I go to parties. And they're just like, what? And I was like, every single person I have met in a social setting and have like shared a meal with or shared a drink with and shared a night with. And I used to live in this loft and we all were at the same house party on a roof. And we think about that thing from 14 years ago and we could point to it and we could like, oh, that person was there and they're doing this thing on that point and they're working in this part of the city. And I think that's how you kind of grow the network, is that you are warm and you welcome people in. You don't gatekeep. I think education is a huge part of it for me, is that I work with young people and I learn from them, and then they come back and like, hey, do you want to work with me on this thing? And that's how it kind of like exponentially grows and becomes multi-generational. And so to hear that you mentor and to hear that you go back and you work with younger and older folks from neighborhoods, like that's how it works. It's like you just, I think the idea of like design as rock star or design as like dictator is kind of dead. So this idea of being a little bit more approachable is the way to go. At least what's been working for me.
I think the work that we do, especially in designing space, has so many contractors, which is there's so many people. I think so we tend to work really closely within the networks of the clients that we work with, and also just to make sure that we're working within the community, so that, like, for instance, when we built Bronzo Winery, we asked the general contractor, and that's the general contractor, what work have you already done in this area? We reach out to our older people also to make sure that they're people that they feel, because generally we lean on their expertise as well. If there's somebody who doesn't have a great track record, or maybe who has done something that isn't beneficial to the community in the past, we won't work with them. But in general, we try to use the networks. Like, for instance, like Grow Greater Englewood is one of our clients. Mm-hmm. Their network is the largest network that I've ever seen, because they do so much great work. But within their network, they have somebody that does almost everything in Englewood. So in general, I think it is easy, but I think we always try to localize it as much as possible. And then on our core team, in design, usually we'll work with some of the same, like architects or brand design or whatever it might be, to make sure that our core team always has the same values, because I think we want to make sure that we're working in a way that feels good for everybody. And so there's a certain level of trust that goes with those certain key positions that you're designing, that sometimes it's a little bit harder to go outside of the network, because when you're designing something as large as like a hotel or a resort, not having comparable value sets can sometimes get in the way of progress. And I think that's the same with like business partnerships too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, for myself, like I try to show up a lot. And what that means is a lot of my work is not just like creating a project or working on a project or making graphic design for particular things. A lot of my work is my life, and so I'm constantly trying to support my friends and their friends and things that they're up to. And often through that, I end up finding, like, again, peers that can be brought in, and to Cecilia's point, like a trusted peer, a peer that understands like the context of the work versus, looking at portfolios and going, their work looks great, let's bring them in. Oh shoot, they're maybe not capable of understanding the complexities of the project or the different communities. So sometimes my friends that I end up doing projects with, they often don't need projects. They don't need graphic design. Sometimes they just need physical labor. So I'll spend my weekend and do the physical labor. And so something that we ended up meeting at was Paula Eguerre's Overton activations. And Overton's this extremely cool thing going on at Anthony Overton School. It's an abandoned school from 10-ish years ago, and she's been activating it for about 7 years. And I often hear other folks within design going, "Golly, how can I get involved?" And I was like, "Well, I got to tell you, I just go there and I set up tents." Because that's what's needed. And they're like, "Well, I want to design something for it." And it's like, but the need is to assemble a tent and make sure the tent doesn't blow over. So a lot of times I think designers often want to go and make a cool website, make a cool poster, and it's often inappropriate. It's not what the actual need is. Sometimes down the line, it's like, "Oh, you did all that work. Hey, what else do you do? Oh, you do graphic design? You want to do this other thing?" And it's never like, "Golly, I'm holding the tent so one day I get to make a logo." It's much more like, I'm extremely into this idea of taking over this space and like reclaiming this abandoned school. And right now, I just need to make sure that there's not enough sandbags, so I'm going to hold this arm of the tent so it doesn't blow over. So it's a lot of showing up and working with others and asking and listening, what do they do? What are they up to? And then you often go, "Oh, I could plug you into that project. I actually need someone that does that."
I liked your point though about you're not holding the tent so that you can one day design their logo, because I do feel like even people I've hired, where I'm like, I try to hire people that I can mentor who then can open up their own business strategy firm, in whatever realm. But I have found that some people I feel like are just like, they get too excited about some of our clients. Well, they'll be like, "Oh, so-and-so, can you maybe introduce us?" I'm confused, and I think that's when you realize that the value sets aren't there, and maybe that's why those people aren't there, because I feel like it's disappointing when there are people who are just doing something because it's self-serving, and mostly because a lot of people maybe many people in design, I think, are in it because they have a burning passion about something. And so you're either passionate about it because you're passionate about supporting that person, which is a lot of the reason I think that we do what we do, because they're advocating for something. So I think when people are just in it so that they can get exposure, to me that's really disappointing, and I think that's been one of like the more challenging things as well, and really just disappointing.
See, now we're getting into advice. And see, good segue, because this is the last question that we have for everyone. What advice would you give to emerging designers looking to align their work with, I guess, activism, the word that we have not defined? I'm sorry, I didn't do as great a job as you as Empower. I love it. You did great with those definitions. What would you tell them about trying to align their work with activism? How would you tell them how to get into this design journey of loving on community as well as providing services for community? What would you tell them going forward? I know what I have for you. Keep going. It's okay. Sometimes it's not as rewarding as you'd like it to be, but keep going, because once you go down that street and you keep seeing all these fabulous businesses that you've helped look fabulous and look good, even though you might not be rich, but they are rich. You've made your neighborhood rich, so keep going. You're making the place rich. So that's what I would say about that. So what would you tell the emerging or the fabulous people of the audience on how to align their work, or tell us more.
There's no money in the banana shop.
Right.
So I think for me, since I work with probably close to 150 young people a year that come through Columbia College, I always tell them, don't look at my portfolio and try to mimic this thing, because it's like what I'm promoting is a spectrum. You can't, there's only so many academic roles. Higher ed's in a weird place. Don't go into debt, don't get an MFA. unless it's something you really want to do, don't do it to fill time, but really understand that what I'm trying to, transpose or show by example is that you as a designer have autonomy to make a decision on where you are on the spectrum of what kind of political designer you are. Like if you want to go super left, know that there's going to be risk and reward there. Like there's going to be a lot of emotional reward and probably a lot of financial risk. If you know you need to not be in debt, get that job out of school and then be able to balance where your morals and ethics are with the boss that you're working with. And know that you have to be kind of true to yourself because you're going to get burnt out otherwise. If you don't look yourself in the mirror and you just keep on following a path, you're going to lose yourself if you don't kind of do these kind of check-ins internally. So I think just know that you have value in your lived experience, but also know that there's other things you might have to sacrifice along the way to kind of live your truest exemplar of practice and kind of passion in life.
I think advice would be take advantage of grants that exist because that allows you the autonomy to figure out which projects that maybe you want to work on and not rely on being paid and still getting paid, I guess. So I think that allows to subsidize. And I think when I think about grants, it's economy of scale. And so if you apply for 10 grants, you will get one. There are grants that are made specifically to provide services like design services for disinvested communities, or there are projects that are designed to allow you space to work on your own creative journey as a designer. And so, I would say don't be too proud to apply for grants. They exist and many people are taking advantage of them. So apply for every grant that comes across your desk. And if you get an email about it, a lot of times they take 10, 15 minutes, save your narrative in a Google Doc so you can copy and paste it over and over again.
Use AI.
Yeah, tweak it a little bit.
You're welcome.
In general, I think apply for as many grants as possible because a lot of that can subsidize. So there are a lot of really incredible art communities across the country that have great grant programs, and so I would say look them up and get on their mail list and try to apply for as many grants as possible because it pays you and allows you to do the work that makes you feel most creatively yourself, so you can pick and choose what you feel like doing.
You can also go on AI and ask AI about the grants. It'll tell you. Use AI. Use it.
That's good advice for me. I've never applied for a grant. I don't know where to find them. I'm just going to go ask AI. If I can't find them, Cecilia, I may have some questions.
I got you.
Advice for folks, I think just there's a couple different things, but just that, none of us will ever have all the answers. So the ability to know, it's really good to just put your hand up and ask something, or to look to someone that has something going on and go, oh, it looks like you understand grants. Can I just ask you a couple questions? I think it's really good to, Dave said a moment ago, decide what type of political designer you are, or decide the politics of your practice, or something like that. I'm not sure. I'm sorry about that. But I think that's to say that knowingly or not, each one of us, designer or not, is extremely political based upon how they spend their money, where they spend their time, how they do their practice. Knowing that is pretty important and allows you to leverage that power. Not knowing that just kind of wastes it. It strengthens whatever thing that you're against because you didn't know that was a possibility. I think recognizing that a designer sits in a seat that is rather powerful. You're a mediator. You're listening to things. You're deciding kind of what happens and what doesn't. Someone said something, someone asked for something, it's completely inappropriate. You didn't say anything or raise your hand. Are you going to make it happen, or are you going to find a way to dance through the conversation and bring them aboard to that other side? I think being able to acknowledge that it's not just like a service you're providing and a series of things to say yes or no to, but it's actually a dialogue. And if people are saying the wrong things, you can try to find a way to evolve that conversation to get it onto a different path.
I have one more. Just mentoring.
More.
Mentoring, and I know everybody's kind of talked about that a little bit. There is a lack of positive influence right now that is overwhelmingly accessible to the next generation. We have the opportunity to talk to each other, and we come from a generation of people that spoke to each other and who still went out and were able to interact with other people. I work a lot with high school kids, so during the Southside Sanctuary Project, we had 50 young women who we mentored to teach them how to be, what does an architect do? What does a city planner do? What does a developer do? All the way into, you know, what do people who pour concrete, that's an art, you know? And overwhelmingly, they just were inept in conversating with each other, with adults. They have a limited scope of what jobs are available. So don't assume that if we don't, and I mean the same with language and culture. I think about indigenous communities. Like if we don't pass on this language that we have and design as a language to the next generation, we'll have a homogenized viewpoint and everything's going to start to look the same because that's the way that Instagram or Meta or whatever it might be wants to see that. And so if you are passionate, part of the activism of what we're doing as designers is you have to articulate that and you have to mentor somebody because that's the only way that we can break that cycle that is happening right now. But I think it's really important from an interpersonal standpoint to mentor, to make sure that you're getting, young children or young people out of their bubble and their shell and their patterns of communication. And then also design, just making sure that you're passing it on to make sure that it's not a lost language.
I love that. No lost languages in design, please. All right, well, we have, I think it's about 14 minutes for questions. So I'm gonna hop down off of this fabulous pedestal and come down here with the fabulous people. And let's see, any questions for our panel? I'm gonna come down. Anybody? All right, here we go. We're down here with the questions.
I'm the person who's always asking questions. Hi. Thank you for the conversation. This was actually really, I appreciated the level of nuance in the questions and the responses. But the thing that particularly caught my interest was the conversation towards the end about values and being driven by passion and value versus just trying to get to something. So I'm curious to know, and in my mind, I know Dave is an educator, but in my mind, education, design education and design practice are really like closely aligned with one another. So I guess my question is, in your opinions, how should design educators be talking to design students about some of the topics that you've raised or talked about?
I don't know how to answer that question. I think it's one thing that I constantly struggle with, because even in the way that you started the keynote this morning, the way that we've learned design is through this thing that is, you are just a person that takes things in, uses this visual design language and skill set, and then you kind of amplify the thing that you have. And so for most times it is to make something more successful, whether those are likes or income or intake for that company. And I think it's really hard to check yourself and say what are your values? Because that's something that I was never taught. You're just always taught to grind harder. You want that job, you got to work 60 hours. You want to stay in that seat, you got to work 70 hours. Oh, I'm working at a place that gives me free taxi rides because then I can just live there. Sure, why not? I'll sign over my heart and then just do that work. And so I think it just takes a lot of frustration. And I don't want young designers to get frustrated early or leave the profession because they've had some really bad work experiences where they've been exploited. And so being honest and be do the research on the company's politics, look at the makeup of the place that you're going to work at, and if they look like you and they feel like they're speaking the same language, you might be a good fit. But just don't blindly apply for everything and then find yourself in a pathway where you're just going to be frustrated or not feel seen at the end of the day.
Anybody else?
I think also making sure that students, it's so hard because when you're a student or when you're at the beginning of your journey, that confidence that comes that confidence I think that comes side by side with the ability to choose your values it doesn't exist then, because you have like this imposter syndrome that you're like, I think I know how to design, and I do think it's really important to know the history of design, to have a great foundation or a base level for which then you can grow and choose your own value set and your own style in the way that you're designing things. So I think it's hard. So I think that teaching the confidence of being able to make that choice is something that we don't talk about in school. I don't think we talk about the psychological aspect of how strong you have to be as a person in yourself and in your design, because I guess I think about architects. Most architects worked for a large firm and designed things that they didn't care about for a long time before they went off and either joined a firm that they cared about or that was smaller, or just started their own practice because they're like, wait, I have this confidence, I have this skill set, I can do this myself. So I think being able to instill that sense of confidence in students at an early age is really important. And I also think using the world to also educate side by side with what you learn in the classroom is important, especially in the United States. I think we tend to have blinders, but when you look at, from a design influence right now, I think Nigeria has the fastest growing youth population in the entire globe. So that's why so much of our influence right now is that music and that design and that art and that fashion. So I think being able to travel and understand that you don't, not that I am an advocate for education, I actually went to school for education, but I think being able to balance the world influence and design around the world with what you're learning in the classroom is really important as well.
I'm not a design educator outside of the studio. I think the role of like a design professor is an extremely difficult one. One that often scares me. I occasionally get opportunities for it, and I'm just like, I don't know how to offer all the things that I think that the individual, yet let alone a whole cohort possibly needs. I think things that I assume could be helpful is really making sure that younger designers understand like the gigantic breadth that exists within each form of design, be that architecture, graphic design, or industrial design. There's all sorts of ways of being and ways of practicing, and there's not one of them's right or wrong. So I think the more examples of practices that one can bring to students, I think is pretty helpful, and the more kind of awareness of like, and how does that work get done can be helpful. That said, you all have a lot on your plates already. I think a lot of times when we're bringing in new folks that are from, whether it's an internship or a younger designer, and they just left a university, oftentimes something that happens is they start to realize like, whoa, there's kind of decades more of learning that happens, or that sharpens my practice. Like I'm not ready to jump in right away, or hey, it doesn't seem like this project's fully formed yet. How do I start? So just a little, more awareness to the different ranges of practices there can be, so that maybe they can identify with a practice that they like or that they're kind of curious about. I do think the person that I was when I graduated from a BFA is way different than the person I am now. The thing that I wanted back then is pretty different than the thing that I want and I get curious about today. And so just like letting folks understand that, golly, that dream, like it may start to morph and change across time. I think it's also good to be, so I mentioned like I went to this school that became defunct, right? And so I practiced for about 17 years after that, after my BFA, and was offered a partnership at this studio that I ended up turning down because I didn't think I was ready, and it also was never on my radar that I could achieve something like that. And so I ended up turning it down and going to a school that was really celebrated and getting an MFA, because I felt as though, like, golly, all these people I'm meeting in design have this way different education than me, and I need to understand what that is before I can be a director or in charge of a studio or something. And in that process of going to a really nice school, I started to learn that not a lot of people were at all like me. Most everyone has infinite wealth at these schools. I still have undergraduate loans and all my master loans. Right now, today, I'm 44 years old. I have my loans. You know, no one wants to talk about debt, and so I think sometimes students with debt are told, yo, just grab the Facebook thing, it's gonna pay it off. You know, and I'm living pretty decently. I have all my loans, I make payments on them. I don't have the house that's as big as my peer that has practiced as long as me. But check out my portfolio and my friends and the work that I'm doing. It's quite different than that giant house, you know. Yeah.
Totally agreed. I thought we'd have more time for one more question. I will piggyback on what everyone up here said. I think it's just a learning curve in education. So I'll tell you that when I graduated with my BFA, I was just pushing pixels around on a computer. Like, I was not designing anything. Like, I thought it was a flyer, because when I look at them now, I'm like, whoa, those are terrible. So I think today, I'm the bomb, and I can get you whatever it is you need. But back then, I thought I was the bomb, and yeah. So it's kind of like a learning curve. Once you, like, when I got with Thirst, you guys really got me. Like, that was he called it my MFA, like my little MFA, because I didn't go to master's degree, but this is where I was going to get my master's in design from him. And I learned a lot. Like, it was like a true glow up. So it's like you learn what you learn in school, but then you kind of got to get that extra kick from somebody else outside of the design world so that you can figure out, oh, this goes here too, and this goes here too, and then you can kind of figure that out. So I think it's not enough for undergrad. I think you have to get out of undergrad and, like, do some practice outside of school to kind of find that niche of where you belong. So that would be what I would say. Well, we have made it to the end of our discussion. I hope you guys have been entertained and informed by our discussion on networks and collaboration. I'm going to let everyone up here let you know how to get in contact with them, just in case you were wondering how you could get in touch. We can start with Nick, go down the line, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
My email is nick@span.studio, and my Instagram is @nickadam. Both are 4-letter words. There's no extra M, extra D, or S.
I love it.
It is justdave.com.
It's fabulous. Good job.
Mine is more complicated. So we're at all of our project portfolios are under the Nascent Group. But if you want to find me almost every day, in the mornings I'll be at Southside Sanctuary on 47th and King. In the evenings you can find me bussing tables at my restaurant, Bronzeville Winery. So we can talk there, have a glass of wine. I'm usually there every night. So
It's amazing. I did the branding for Bronzeville Winery, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, if you check me out, Southside Sanctuary in the mornings, Bronzeville Winery at night, but our company is called the Nascent Group, and we love collaborations, we love conversations, and if anybody wants to further this conversation, we can do that at Bronzeville Winery in a glass of wine or tea or coffee on me. So,
How do we find you, Summer?
What'd you say?
How do we find you, Summer?
You find me at summercoleman.com. There you go. That's very easy. Just summercoleman.com. Blacken graphics also, because I blacken your graphics. Like chicken. All right. It's been great. I hope you guys have had the best time here. We love you. And go forth and be merry. Have a great afternoon, everybody.